Hi, Kristina, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Happier to be seeing you today.
So
Thank you for
lovely.
inviting me.
I'm so happy to have you here. I remember, so when I was in Australia, I remember that you and I followed each other on Instagram, and you had this really cool photo of you like in the city. You looked like a little rebel on this photo, and you were just this like birth activist rebel person that I just thought, oh, she's cool. And then you happen to be Swedish, but you're actually living in the UK, and you sound very much like an English person with your accent. You
Very
mentioned
British.
such a strong British accent, but actually we're both Swedish, which is really hilarious.
Yes.
But we're going to speak English for everyone to
Hmm.
understand, obviously. So I'm really happy to have you here. You're now a good friend of mine, and I have not heard your birth stories, so it will be very interesting to hear them. So take it away, Kristina. Take us back to when you were young and you got
Mm.
pregnant the first time.
Mm. Oh, thank you, my darling. Yeah, I'm a bit of a punk rocker, I think, at heart. That's my background in the 80s. So that's my rebellious streak, occupying maternity wards and going to demonstrations and stuff. But when I got pregnant with my first child, of course, I had no idea about the systemic flaws with the maternity system or that there was any risk really in giving birth in hospital or getting caught up in the whole mainstream way of doing it. My main motivator for choosing a so-called alternative birth, a natural birth, was the spiritual insight that I suspected was inherent in going through this profound physiological transformation and challenging biological process of bringing life into the world. And I was proven so right. My goodness, birth is a huge initiation, and I'm so grateful I followed my instincts despite the fact that there was not really any support in the surrounding world to mirror that back to me. But so my background is in a spiritual tradition known as the Gurdjieff teaching. It's one of the esoteric traditions, mystical traditions of the world associated with the different great religions in the world, like Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, Kabbalah, um, the yogic parts of the yogic tradition, Christian mysticism, and so on. So the Gurdjieff tradition is an esoteric tradition. And I was very serious about my spiritual inner work at the time that I became pregnant. So I was eagerly exploring every avenue for inner growth. So when this opportunity arose for me as a woman, I grasped it with both hands to go into my conception, pregnancy, and birth as consciously as I possibly could. And by consciously, I mean awareness of my place in the cosmos, the cosmological correspondences, as above, so below, what's manifesting in my body, what's manifesting in all of creation, the laws of creation playing out in my body, and also being aware, like an observer, an objective observer of what was playing out in me. And I am so grateful to having had this spiritual training because I think it accelerated my journey towards experiencing the initiation that is inherent in birth. And it's a real possibility for every single woman, but that is far too often stolen from us by interference, various forms of interference and disturbance. So I believe that for us women, this is a true, genuine superpower. I don't use that word lightly because it is the road to enlightenment. And we have the opportunity to experience it like that when we are pregnant and give birth. And this is what I believe is one of the main reasons why it's been so fiercely suppressed and opposed by the system and the patriarchal systems that are in place around women's health generally, but childbirth and pregnancy in particular.
Mm.
And yeah, I just want to say, I always say this when I use the word patriarchy or patriarchal systems, that this is in no way something that is associated with men specifically. Patriarchal systems are upheld by women just as much as men, but they are a legacy. Well, that's a different podcast, but they are a legacy of patriarchal religion and land
Mm.
ownership and so on. So I just want to make it clear that this is not anti-men in any way, and men are harmed just as much as women by patriarchal structures. Everyone is born. Birth and pregnancy is not a women's issue. It's a human issue. We are
Oof,
all
goosebumps.
born, and how it happens really matters.
Definitely.
So
You and I
that's,
are definitely on the same page of that. Everything you said just resonates so deeply within every cell of my being.
oh, thank you, my sister. Thank you for hearing and for
Mhm.
resonating. But yeah, so that's the background to my choices around birth. So my first child, I just knew there was something wrong with society as a whole. I mean, I think we all have an instinct that there are serious problems with our modern Western civilization, at least all the people that listen to this podcast. So I had that inkling, and so I was kind of suspicious of the maternity system, and I just read what I could. There was a bit Ina May Gaskin, Janet Balaskas, Sheila Kitzinger. I read the books that I could get my hands on back in 1995. And I realized that, I think the less disturbance I have, the more opportunity I will have a profound experience and get all the juice out of this transformation that is happening in me and in my body. So, but of course, discussing home birth with the people around me and the surrounding world, and I had a wonderfully supportive husband and my mother as well. But there was no one around me who'd given birth at home. Nobody I knew, nobody to talk to. So I didn't quite dare take that full first step with my first child. But at the time in Stockholm, there was an alternative birth clinic, which was adjacent to one of the main hospitals in Stockholm. So I chose to give birth there. And that was a wonderful experience. It was good enough in the sense that it didn't destroy my belief in myself and my ability to birth, and for that I'm eternally grateful to the midwives and the people that made that birth center happen. But it also made me realize that even that disruption of traveling to the hospital in the car, getting in the car, going through contractions in the car, walking into the hospital, people speaking to me, and then being allocated a room, which we no medical equipment, everything was lovely atmosphere, lovely kind midwives. But all that stalled my labor, of course. So it took like an hour or something like that, an hour and a half for it to get going again. And then I started working intensely and deeply, like I had been doing at home for about 6 hours before I went in, with this wonderful midwife who became my angel, my everything, my God, my goddess. I was just grasping her hands and looking into her eyes and descending into every contraction with her, and it was going really well, and I was opening beautifully. And then she said to me, my shift's over now, I'm afraid. This is just the way it works. So my colleague here will be taking over. And for me, this was completely unspeakable, horrific disaster. It was like God said, I'm sorry, the world's got to end right now. And just really sorry, but you're going to lose everything, all your anchor, your axis, your center of gravity. That's how profound that experience was for me. And I think it's very important that we give ourselves permission to put words on the intensity of seemingly insignificant things like a midwife changing her shift.
That's not insignificant. And, having been a birth worker for so many years and seeing how that plays out, it is a huge disruption. It's very unsettling to change that birth space holder, whoever she is, usually she, right, a midwife, in that room. Of course, I totally understand that. So this was
Thank you. Yeah.
your first birth. So you had been
Mm-hmm.
home for about 6 hours laboring on your own before you
Mm-hmm.
headed on in, and
Mm-hmm.
you had to drive in, and that in itself, as you just mentioned, is such a disruption to the physiology. It does slow things down. And then you ended up. How long were you then laboring with this midwife before she had to change shifts?
So I must have got in there about 6 o'clock in the evening. So it took about an hour to get going again. So 7 until 9 in the evening, I was
Right.
laboring with her. And then she had to go. And then a new midwife came. And of course, then the labor slowed down again. So, she was just the midwife was just sitting in the corner of the room timing my contractions. And it just wasn't happening. so at about 11 o'clock, I realized, shit, if I don't take responsibility for this whole situation now, and again, this is where my spiritual training really kicked in. No one else is responsible. I am responsible for what happens in my life and how things play out. It doesn't mean that you can never be in a victim position. Of course you can, but it was really good I had that spiritual training, because I just said, look, this is not working for me. Our personal chemistry is not working. I want you to go, and I want a different midwife. And this is one of the things I'm most proud of in my whole life, because once again, it's so seemingly insignificant. It's just, she was sitting in the corner of the room looking at a stopwatch, timing my contractions. And there was just something about it that was really unsettling me. Now, with hindsight, of course, I know it's because she was measuring me. She was trying to get me to fit into a clock, into a universe where I wasn't at all. I was heading into timelessness, to weightlessness, to beinglessness, to nothingness, to that transient, transcendental state you go to fetch your baby. And her relationship with the clock was disrupting me. So, but intuitively, I somehow managed to know this, and I managed to stand up for myself. And it feels like my higher self stepped in and protected Kristina, even though Kristina didn't understand all the consequences of the seemingly insignificant things that were playing out in hospital. So she left, and in came the head of the maternity ward. She smelled of perfume, booze, and cigarettes. She'd obviously been called in. She'd obviously been called in from a dinner party, but she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. She was super duper experienced, confident. She just like oozed that kind of complete relaxation. This labor is completely brilliant. It's going really, really well. The poor woman just needs to tap into her own power. And so within about 15 minutes, she'd kind of taken charge of the room, and I could just relax and go back into my transcendent state. And she said to me, look, next contraction, I just want you to think of every swear word you can and have ever heard. And I just want you to voice them all. Find your power, find your force, use the anger embedded in you to harness your strength. I mean, she didn't say those words, but this is what I took from her presence in the room. She probably didn't say very much at all, but I'm just telling you what I took from her presence. So the next contraction, I was like, turning the air blue with my swear words, but in a very happy, powerful, strong, empowered place. And he popped out like a champagne cork, just like plop. He flew into the hands of my partner, his father. So that was a labor of a total of 12 hours, 6 hours at home and 6 hours in this midwife-led clinic. And then I stayed in overnight. I got some help with him latching on. The placenta was born physiologically, but at that time I didn't know anything about stem cells and wait for white and not cutting the cord too early. So my memory isn't super clear about that. But everyone treated us respectfully, and I was home within 24 hours. So that was, with hindsight, I realized that was a very positive birth experience, just about as perfect as it can get in a hospital environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was my first birth.
Wow. How old were you for your first?
I was 28.
I
28.
I love that. Obviously that was a birth center, and there was some really good midwives holding space for you there to have that. But I love how in tune you were and how you dared to stand up for yourself. Because even like I've been, assisting births with women who are in life, like these real like boss ladies, whatever you call it, like, successful, maybe they are a boss, for other people, like a person that takes charge, has a voice. You could never think that she wouldn't have one in labor, but it's actually super rare, super rare. You get into that deep liminal space, you're in that very like just, well, you're not in your neocortex, aren't you? So like to actually access that you did, I find that super impressive. And that you said that to her, that you wanted her to leave that midwife that wasn't supporting you in the way that you knew that you needed.
Thank you so much for seeing and acknowledging that. That means a lot to me. I do think that was my spiritual training, because we, trained to create an outside observer, your higher self, as it's kind of, known in the spiritual traditions. But if you do that, you practice that a lot, there is some sort of objective part of you that can step in. And I think that was the key takeaway of my first birth, is that I realized that Kristina, the personality complex, with all her learned behaviors, her upbringing, her conditioning, her cultural, genetic background, she needed to step aside. Kristina needed to step aside. And the space that's created when Kristina steps aside allows this higher self the room to manifest in the most profound moment of creation, actual birth of new life. So this was the start of my realization that was a totally unique spiritual path inherent in pregnancy and childbirth for women.
Gosh, I really, really resonate with that. I feel like you are so right. I speak of this in so many different ways, different words and with different women in different contexts, but like the whole thing about in birth, right? Your ego has to die, your ego has to step aside, your maiden has to die, the mother has to be born. It is so much more than what we are being told by this mainstream culture, that it's a physical event that hurts you and you need to numb it and you need to tap out. Like, no, it's the opposite. You need to dive on in and you need to surrender the ego and that personality you're talking about, that wanting to control, that wanting to, and just, yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. I love what you shared.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge the spiritual value of pregnancy and birth, because that is something that's been removed from it. Like you say, it's just been turned into a medical emergency that we shouldn't feel at all. Just numb it, just make it go away. So yeah, and if we do that, we also lose our most powerful route to higher consciousness that is anchored in the female body, in our female cyclical biology. Nature's design for us includes the spiritual path. And I actually believe that women are particularly lucky because we have this playing out in our bodies. We have an instant access to consciousness and the highest dimension of spirituality, which men have to dedicate their lives towards attaining in monasteries, spiritual traditions, different spiritual practices, exercises, and so on. We have the highway to heaven in our bodies, and this has been kept from the vast majority of people, and it's considered just to be a nonsense. But I think it's very important part of reclaiming birth is reclaiming the spirituality of birth, and that's one of the reasons why I have trained in recent years as a sacred birth keeper, because the sacred in birth is something that is sorely missing in our civilization. And we need to reinstate the practices, the ceremonies, the rituals that honor the depth of the experience.
Yes, couldn't agree more. I really echo what you're saying, in that it's truly feminine spirituality that's being reclaimed as we reclaim ourselves as channels between the heavens and the earth, right?
Exactly.
Ah, so you will become pregnant 2 more times. Let's dive on into the second.
So the second one, I was a lot more prepared, and I'd kind of, given myself permission to really think, nah, I don't really want to get caught up in the system. I think I went for one visit to the antenatal clinic, and I think I had one ultrasound. But that's when my eyes were first open to the fact that they try and scare you. So, I was told by the midwife I saw that there was a danger of hemorrhaging if I gave birth at home. That basically trying to instill fear in me with different narratives about blood loss. So I decided not to go back to the antenatal clinic, and that's when I started looking for home birth midwives and finding my own solutions. So God knows how I did it in those days before the internet. I must have called a lot of people on landlines, I guess. But anyway, I found this wonderful midwife who very experienced, an older woman, Åsa Berglund, and she's my soul mate because she guided me over these two next births. She a Swedish midwife who decided to support women who wanted to give birth at home. I got to know her, in the run up to the birth, and she's just very calm, very just instilled confidence in me and affirmed my own belief in my body's intelligence. I think that's an important thing to acknowledge as well, that the body is hugely intelligent. We sort of think of intelligence as something that resides in the brain, in the neocortex, like you say. But in fact, every single process in our body is infinitely more intelligent than our neocortex, which is kind of paradoxical because, all the transformations of substances, all the secretions of the glands, the digestion, the circulation, pregnancy itself, and the process of birth, for which the body has had no training, no practice, and it just knows how to do the first time it does it, that is a very high form of intelligence. So, yeah, so she basically affirmed me in my hunch that the body was intelligent, more intelligent than Kristina, this personality complex I mentioned earlier, and that I could trust in that. I could lean back and trust into that. So when labor started, I mean, this was a much quicker labor. And I like all the women I've spoken to over the last 20 years as a birth activist, I do realize now that my labors were easy. I didn't feel like that at the time. It felt very challenging and there was pain and all sorts of things, but they were quick and easy, really. So labor started about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I was working at my desk as a translator. I was in my home. I knew I didn't have to go anywhere. I had the birthing pool set up. I'd rented a birthing pool from England because there were none available in Sweden at the time, and set up this fancy heating system because the hot water in my house was not enough. Change the water every 24 hours. So I felt like, I had all that. That was all ready. That was the thing I knew I'd done. I prepared something for myself to rest in if I needed support. I'd done a lot of preparation. I should also say that I did a lot of hypnobirthing, although it wasn't really known as that at the time. I bought a cassette tape from a lady in London. She can't remember her name now, but it was called the Jairani Way. This was an Indian woman, and she had this cassette tape where she kept talking about the physiological tissues, your tissues open easily and smoothly, the baby slips through lightly and with ease, that sort of thing. So I listened to that every day for maybe 3 or 4 months, and that helped me tremendously prepare for birth at home. And then having the pool ready, and then having the midwife that I felt trusted me and validated me in my own confidence. So when the labor started at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, I was quite comfortable to carry on translating because I support myself as a translator. I've done that for 30 years now. So I was just, typing away and then standing up to take a contraction, then typed a bit more, standing up to take a contraction. And then when I sort of felt like, I don't know I can't really do this anymore. So then I went down to the room where the birthing pool was and carried on there on the sofa. And so this was maybe about 6 o'clock. So only 2 hours of labor. 6 o'clock, I got into the water because it was getting really painful. I was standing up, taking contractions. I was leaning over the sofa. I went into the sauna because I could hold on to these 2 sides of the sauna. I'm just finding my own positions, basically. But when it started getting overwhelming, I got into the water, and that was just heaven, absolute heaven. You know, that weightlessness, the warmth, the caress of the water, feeling that I'd prepared this for myself so lovingly. And I could just rest and relax and continue my deeply intelligent bodily work. And in between contractions, I'd just lean on the edge of the birthing pool and I would fall asleep. So I fell asleep between every contraction. And I think this is one of the privileges of an undisturbed birth, that although the experience of the contractions is very intense and there's no denying pain, challenge, physical exertion, you can at the same moment, at the snap of your fingers, fall deeply to sleep and just rest completely for a minute or even 30 seconds. And what a gorgeous design by nature, herself, God, goddess, whatever you want to call it. What a gorgeous, gorgeous dance has been created for us. And that we must need to experience the intensity of this force, the life force itself that passes through our bodies like a wind, like a tornado, like the snowstorm you described earlier. We need to experience that to gain access to the polar point around which the whole universe revolves, this point of perfect peace and stillness and letting go. The two are intimately connected. And if we allow it, this dance, it feels like the most primal of forces, like the forces of the atom, the forces of gravity of the solar system, of the whole galaxy, the unfurling of the spirals. It pivots around that moment, the switch between the intensity of all the forces of the universe and the complete peace of that rest, the moment between the in-breath and the out-breath at its very peak is what you experience between the contractions. And that is what that was the first time I experienced that with the birth of my daughter. So I worked like that for about an hour, falling asleep and taking the contractions in the water. And then the midwife came. She didn't do anything really like a good midwife does. She was just there enabling me, empowering me, loving me, not needing any attention, no ego stroking, no need to feel useful or anything. She was just in the corner of the room, her watchful eye making me feel completely safe, held. And so another hour, I think the total labor was 4 or 5 hours. About 8 o'clock, it was becoming like, I can't cope with this anymore. This is too much. But then I was standing up in the water. I was standing up and just screaming pretty much, you know, like this wonderful lowing that we do, this massaging of our own vagus nerve that we just do intuitively if we're allowed to slip into that altered state, you know, the primal animalistic sound that the Tibetan monks worked so hard for decades to achieve, that we can just have, well, by giving birth, have access to. The humming, the elk cow, this really primal sound. I think everyone who's given birth knows exactly what I mean. So I was doing that and soothing myself, and I was standing up and I was saying, I think I was, by this time I was just going, wah! You know, the last few contractions I was just screaming because I thought I was going to bloody die, you know, like we all do. And you do die. You do die, like you rightly said, Anna, you do die. You die to your previous self, and that is what an initiation is. You know, why pay hundreds of pounds to go on a retreat to have an artificially induced initiation when you have access to this in your own human body, the most profound, deepest initiation of all. So anyway, so I was standing up, and I remember reaching down and feeling my daughter and saying, I can't do this. And that's when the midwife spoke. You can do this. Receive your child. I said, I can't. She said, put your hands down, take her. So I did. And I took her and I brought her up to my chest. And I'm so, so grateful for the midwife that at that point, she did exactly the right thing. She didn't step forward, rush forward and take my daughter for me. She knew me so well, and she knew that moment so well, that she, even though I was saying, I can't do it, I need someone else to do this for me, she knew to say, you can do it, Kristina, and you're doing it now. And I did it. So I received my own daughter in my hands and took her to my chest. And so that was an absolute peak experience as well. And obviously a spiritual initiation. And then when I realized I had a daughter, I think it was somewhere around there that I realized that, okay, I'm going to need to somehow document these experiences, because they are such profound, time, out of matter, out of, the connection with the eternal, with eternity. And yeah, just that timelessness outside of time. I need to start thinking about, what does this mean? And why is there nothing in the spiritual traditions written about this? Largely because the spiritual traditions have been created by males. And again, this is one of the consequences of patriarchal culture. And males lose out when women don't have these transformational spiritual experiences. So that's where the seed of my book, Natural Birth, a Holistic Guide, that's where that started, I think, with the birth of my daughter, because I thought, you have this inner voice saying to you, who are you to write a book? You're not a writer. How you don't, what makes you think you could write a book? And I just thought, well, if I just write it for my daughter, at least then I've documented this incredible, mind-blowing experience I've had. So that's where the idea came, I think.
I love that.
So that was birth number 2.
Wow, when you were talking about, receiving your daughter and that midwife and what she said, it brought tears to my eyes. It was really so moving, deeply moving, so powerful. Your diet, your relationship, and what a profound initiation.
I'm so grateful for the women who have come into my life in different ways, what they've enabled and opened up for me through, again, seemingly small things, actions, words. It's in the little things that the most precious part of life resides.
Yeah. Yes. And I think the more conscious a person is, the more aware you are, the more you understand that, deeply inside. Less is more, so often, isn't it?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so how long was this birth?
About 5 hours, probably, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She was born at 20 past 8 in the evening.
Wow, that is fast and furious.
I know, but I didn't know any different.
No, that was your perfect.
I hadn't become a birth activist then, so I didn't really know what other people's births were like. And I'm another woman I'm really grateful to is my mother, because although she did not have a great birth experience with me, it was physiological, but it was in a hospital in Sweden in the 1965, and she was a single mother, not married, so the midwives were fairly horrible to her and unkind, and did quite a few unpleasant things to her, but she never instilled the fear of birth in me, or allowed the abuse that was directed against her to influence me in any way. She kept that clean for me. She basically didn't really talk about birth in the run up to my birth. Not that I asked her or anything, but she could easily have just, if she would just have mechanically done what most of us do, is you just can't help yourself. You just end up saying, oh, well, my birth wasn't very nice, and this happened and that happened. And so I'm so grateful to her for just refraining from saying anything, because she left an open space for me to step into my own experience. And I have, obviously, afterwards, I have spoken to her about it and found out how my birth was. So we have communicated about this afterwards, but I'm very grateful that she didn't create a subconscious template for me of a negative expectation with regard to birth. It was just empty, just a blank slate.
And coming into your third then, so how far between are your second and your third baby?
Well, there's 3 years between each of them, and what I did was I just breastfed. So I breastfed Theo, my first, for 3 years, and then as soon as I stopped breastfeeding, I got pregnant. And then I breastfed Ella, not quite for 3 years, but nearly. And then as soon as I stopped breastfeeding, I got pregnant again. So for me, that worked really, really well as a natural contraceptive and natural spacing between children. Yeah, I realize that might not be the case for everyone, but I feel like nature's intelligent design. Nature knows exactly what she's doing with these experiences.
Yeah. And
Um,
so by this point though, are you a little birth rebel by this point? Are you an advocate or
No,
not
not,
yet?
no, absolutely not. But I had started talking to other people about this bloody amazing experience that I'd had. And what I found was that almost universally, well, I would say universally, that was not the experience that other people were having. So I did feel alone. I felt weird. I doubted my own experience. Was it really that good, or am I imagining things? Because I was getting this like, oh my God, no, my birth was absolutely horrific. I never want to give birth again. I can't believe I had a second child. That was so stupid. Literally, that kind of feedback is what I was getting from other women.
Yeah.
So, but that's like I said, I had this seed that I thought, well, I'd better put this down into words, if nothing else, for the sake of my own daughter. So that's kind of where I was by the time I got pregnant with my third child, who I just did the same thing because it worked with my daughter. I listened to that cassette tape again and again, probably maybe a bit longer, maybe for 4 or 5 months, and asked the same midwife to support me, arranged the same setup with the birthing pool because it had worked so well. The pregnancy was a bit more challenging. It was my third, and I had two little children running me ragged around the house. And I was, by this time, starting to homeschool the first and running a business from home. So it was quite intense. And with hindsight, I would have taken better care of myself. This is why I think what's happening now with postpartum care and postpartum doulas, it's such a precious, precious part of the evolution of all of mankind, because honoring the mother is something that we have forgotten how to do in our culture. We think that feminism and equality means behaving like men in the workplace and in life. And this is so wrong and harmful for the boys that are growing up in this environment, as well as obviously the girls. But yeah, I just want to again make it clear that this is not a feminist issue or a women's rights issue. Really, it's a human issue. The future of humanity is at stake, and how we view pregnancy, birth, and motherhood is a key aspect of the transition that we're on the threshold of as a species, as a body of a living body comprised of billions of human cells, individuals in this collective body. But anyway, so with Gabriel, my lovely Gabriel, I prepared in the same way. And oh yeah, that's right, because I was doing the preparation a little bit more in earnest. I guess you get better at anything you practice. So I was envisaging my cervix, because now I'd had my cervix open twice, so I had more of a visceral understanding of what that meant and what that felt like. So I used a lot of images to visualize my cervix opening, like images of camera apertures unfolding, flowers opening, anything that was sort of circular, spiral shaped. I would look at that and I'd try to meditate on that and just help my cervix open gently and slowly. And that actually happened. That happened. So this birth was very different. The mucal plug went, and then nothing happened for a week, because with the others, the mucal plug went, and the first birth was 12 hours total. The second birth was 5 hours total. So when the buccal plug went, I thought, oops, this is going to happen now soon. But that was not the case, because I think the buccal plug probably went at an earlier stage, and it was a slower opening because of all the visualization and preparation I was doing. This with hindsight, this is my rationalization anyway. But yeah, so that birth was slower, and then there was a week of just sort of waiting, really, not having any contractions or anything, but no buccal plug. And then oh yeah, that's right. This is another thing I didn't mention with Ella, my second child, and with Gabriel. They both named themselves in that sort of liminal state during pregnancy and late pregnancy, during a rest or a half sleep. They came to me and named themselves. So Ella appeared to me as a middle-aged woman, about 40, with short curly hair, or sort of wavy styled hair, and quite bossy, quite sort of not aggressive, but very determined. She says, "I'm Ella." No debating, there's no discussing this. She just was Ella. And I was like, okay. And then after this, all sorts of things have happened with my daughter. She had as an 18-year-old, a major brain injury and a personality change as a result of that. But that's the subject of a different podcast. But in any case, life has explained to me why she came to me in this way in that dream, because her personality really changed. So that's just very, very interesting, this sort of communication between, and this is what I mean about the time out of time, the timelessness of pregnancy and birth. It really is a unique opportunity to communicate with the past and the future and the eternal that resides free, liberated of time, the constraints of time and matter. So I think it's not an unusual experience to have communications with your unborn child. But this became clear to me, both with Ella, who named herself, and then Gabriel, who also came to me in a dream. He came to me as a baby, God knows why. But anyway, it was just a baby that said, Gabriel, my name's Gabriel. And I was like, oh, no, I don't like that name. Oh, I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast. I wanted him to be named Leonard or Cademan. God knows why. But anyway, so he came to me and said he was Gabriel, and I was like, I was trying to ignore that. Owen, I think I wanted as well, Owen. But and then I was out during this week after the buccal plug had gone, and I was just waiting. I was out and about, and I went to the car broke down. I took it to some car repair place. And then I started to have contractions, and I thought, oh, shit. I was out with both children, and the car had broken down. And so I went to sit down. I sat down on one of the high stools by the counter in the mechanic's workshop. And I just took the contractions, calmed myself down. And then when I had I realized, okay, I'm not going to give birth imminently. My waters haven't broken yet. I stood up and I looked down at the stool I was sitting on, and it said Gabriel on the stool. Wow. I was like, oh, shit, I'm going to have to call him Gabriel. Okay, that's it. I have no say in this. This is just the way reality works now, magical reality. So, and then when I left the workshop, there was a big poster in the window saying "Give Life." So I just thought, all right, that's it. I have no say. This is Gabriel coming now, and he's coming. And then within a day or two, he was born even quicker. And he came really softly, gently in the night. So at about 12:30, after I'd gone to sleep, I started having these sort of period-like sensations. I tried to carry on sleeping. By this time, I certainly didn't want to rush up, because I'd wake up children, husband, and start a circus. So I just tried to stay asleep as long as I could. After about an hour in bed, I just quietly went downstairs into the room I'd prepared, just quietly, softly. It's like velvet in the darkness. I really enjoyed that, working in the dark in the night. That was so lovely. I felt so safe and held by the night. Continued working for a couple of hours. Then I started lowing, and I remember shouting up to my husband upstairs, So, oh, I think I think it's happening. He was like, no, it's not happening yet. You're not loud enough. I think he wanted to carry on sleeping. So I continued like this. By about 3 a.m. I was in the water, and I said to him, "You've got out to get the midwife now." So she came. The same woman again. She came in about 40 minutes before he was born. And again, she didn't need to do anything. She's just standing in the corner of the room, just holding the space.
Mm.
She was the still point of the turning world, and so was I. I just knew she was there for me 100%. She was listening to my every breath, my every sound, watching the flutter of my eyelids. She knew exactly where I was and needed to do nothing. So grateful, so grateful. And so at 4:44, Gabriel was born, and by this time, Adam just about came down. But I just did it all myself, all myself, and received him myself. And oh yes, and the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck a couple of times, but never a moment of concern or worry, either from me or from the midwife. There was never any fear in that room, or any thinking in that room. I just remember the midwife, when when I was holding him, she just gently stepped towards me, and she just put one finger around the umbilical cord and untangled it from around his neck. And it was all just done in complete silence, with like balletic dexterity. Just one of those moments where everything is moving really, really slowly. There's infinite amounts of time to do everything. A bit of a Matrix moment, when they're like moving really slowly through the air. That's what it felt like. That was my Matrix moment, when she untangled the umbilical cord from around his neck, and everything was just perfect. So that was my third. And so after these extraordinary experiences, which are the birthright of every single woman, that's when I started to think, what the hell is wrong with the way women are treated in birth? Because, like I said, I didn't hear anyone else talking about profound spiritual experiences or even positive experiences. So then I started to look into how the maternity system worked, and that is when I became a birth activist. And shortly after that, in 2013, I met Maria Bengtsson, my wonderful best friend and business partner, and she had similar empowering birth experiences. And from then on, we were just best mates, and became, passionate birth activists. But I wrote my book in about 2010. So by then I was sufficiently removed from the immediacy of being the mother of, infants and very young children. And I'd also had a bit of perspective on my birth experiences, and I'd had time to digest and think through what they meant spiritually. So my book was published in 2010. And I think it's important. I think it's an important contribution, because every single woman who experiences this can make an important contribution to all the future generations of women and men who are going to become parents, and how that plays out. This beautiful future that we are on the threshold of birthing collectively now. So please voice your experiences.
Yeah. And you and Maria you've both also now recently written a new book, currently in Swedish only, but hopefully translated soon to English. That is, if you would translate it to English, what would you call your book?
Well, probably not that. I mean, I'm the working title at the moment is like Revolution in the Maternity Factory, but that's a bit of it's a bit of a literal translation. I'm sure a publisher can come up with something more punchy, but that's basically what it's about. The second book, my second book that I wrote with Maria, is that's a much more kind of political activist book. It is a systematic review of the flaws inherent in the maternity system, that in detail describes how the current Western maternity system is rigged against the physiology, of birth and a woman's biological processes and hormonal processes. It's rigged. So the odds are stacked against you if you go into that system blindly without doing your research first.
And it's so great. You have it out now in Swedish. It's definitely very needed here in Sweden. And every birth worker in Sweden who can, understand Swedish should read it. And soon when it's in, out in English, then it should be everywhere. So that's a great contribution. Thank you for bringing that body of work. I know it's a big thing to bring to the world. Now, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
I would say, my darling sister, you are so loved by the women who've come before you and whose wisdom and intelligence is embodied in every cell of your body. They birthed you, your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, 1,000 generations back in time, and all of them lived to produce offspring and know that you are healthy in your being. Prepare for birth. Use your neocortex, your frontal lobes, to assimilate information that will help you return to that physiology. Because you are alive in a culture, a civilization, where the odds are stacked against you having an empowering experience supported by women who know how to give birth and who have seen many births. Use your intelligence to read up and prepare your body for birth. So, like I described myself, that hypnobirthing, I think, is a very useful tool, whether you call it hypnobirthing meditation or listening to cassette tapes, whatever you want. But that sort of training your neural circuitry to have positive expectations of opening and release and ease and flowing. You can train your brain to facilitate those physical processes. I think that's an important part of taking responsibility for your experience is preparation. So prepare for birth. Do not assume that your biology will necessarily unfold as it's designed to do, because you are living in the world where the odds are stacked against you. So assume responsibility for where you find yourself in time, in culture, in place, and take charge. It's your experience, your body, your child, your life that's going to play out. And you are on the threshold of your greatness, of your moment of seeing who you really are. And to do that, listen inward, because you have an inner voice, you have an inner knowing that is connected to those foremothers, and not only to the foremothers, but to the future generations of humans that are standing in the future, applauding you, bowing to you, cheering you on, knowing what you are capable of. So listen to that voice and do not become hypnotized, entranced by all the negativity, fear-mongering in the external world around you. You know you are beautiful, gorgeous, loved, held, and there's a whole community of women around you right now ready to support you. Reach out, ask for help. Your body knows.
It's been absolutely a tremendous pleasure. I absolutely adore and love every word you've shared today. I feel so inspired. You speak my language. It tickles every cell of my being.
Oh, my beautiful sister, likewise. And I'm so grateful for this space that you hold and the threads that you are constantly throwing out into the world and weaving with all the other wonderful women that are doing this really critical work in these seemingly dark times. We are the shoots pressing through the dark soil up towards the light, and we are all connected. And I'm so grateful for your presence. Beautiful, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.